Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and today my guest is...
Hi, I'm Mike Chen, and I'm the author of We Could Be Heroes.
Which is a great name for a book because it starts a David Bowie playlist in my head every time I read the title.
The book was originally called Anonymous because that's one of the themes in there is about anonymity. But then when we were getting the final contract done, my agent made a joke. He said, like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna just call this We Could Be Heroes," and I'm like, "Can we do that? Is that legal? Like, will we get sued by the Bowie estate?" And he's like, "No, you can do that with titles." And I'm like, "Okay, change it." He's like, "You just can't quote the song lyrics in it." So we changed it right before we went to contract.
That's awesome. And it's always good to talk to another David Bowie fan.
Huge David Bowie nerd, yes.
Me too. I used to redo the lyrics of his songs to be lullabies for my kids.
Ziggy Stardust has been, up until my daughter stopped getting lullabies, maybe about a year ago, Ziggy Stardust was what I would sing to her all the time. And so she knows David Bowie. She just did this drawing of, like, one of her favorite characters right now is Marceline the Vampire from Adventure Time.
Good choice.
She's obsessed with Marceline, and she always draws pictures of her. But then she drew a picture of her one time with her bass guitar, and then she's wearing a different shirt, and she pointed out she's wearing a David Bowie shirt and it's got the lightning bolt. And she said, "Because Marcy feels extra cool today." And I'm like, "That's right, kid."
Yeah, I used to sing Space Oddity Ground Control to Major Tom, but I changed it to my kids' names.
Oh, that's cool.
And now they're total David Bowie nerds themselves. So let's talk about your book, because We Could Be Heroes is one of those books. And I think before the interview began, we talked about Natalie Zena Walshott's Hench. And I think I said the same thing to her when I interviewed her. It was one of those books that, like, I'll get like descriptions for galleys, and it just came across my vision, and I was like, yes, this is the book that you need to just feed me this book, because it's my type of book. I am a huge fan of superhero mythos. I love the whole behind the scenes in superhero, supervillain world. And I also had heard about your previous book in an interview with Annalee Newitz. We did a special episode when the pandemic began, which was something to the effect of a sci-fi author's guide to reading during the pandemic. And I know that I believe you were on their podcast with Charlie Jane Anders, which was,
yes,
that our opinions are correct.
Yeah.
So I saw the book was about superheroes, and then I saw your name attached to it, and I was like, absolutely, let's do this. I want to read this book and then interview this author. So where did this book come about?
So it was actually, it was a short story that I published back in 2017. So I was, the way publishing works, like your agent sends your manuscripts on submission, and you can wait anywhere from like 6 months to like 2 years to hear what's going to happen. And so my debut book, Here and Now and Then, that went on submission in like fall of 2015, and it was just on submission for a really long time with a lot of near misses, and I was getting depressed and frustrated. And my agent said halfway through that, he said, like, "Why don't you write some short stories? Just try to do something fun." And so I wrote a short story, which was very close to chapter 5 of We Could Be Heroes, about a supervillain and a superhero who accidentally meet up. It was an AA meeting. And they talked about their anonymity and the importance of that, and like it's very, very similar, except there's no fire that breaks out in that chapter. In the short story, like they just agree to disagree and like walk away from each other. And so then my first book sold, and then my second book sold, and then we fulfilled my contract. And it was time to come up with like what's book 3 going to be. And I kept going back to this short story, and I said, like, when I was writing this, I kind of built up their backstory. I built out like this rough world of where they're in. I think that'd be a lot of fun. And so we just went with it. And I was really, really nervous because I thought, like, who's going to buy a superhero novel? There's no way my publisher is going to let me get away with this. But I think the timing for release is right right now.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of the feedback I'm getting is like, we are so desperately exhausted by 2020 that, it's nice to have something that's light and fun. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I think people are really, really going to enjoy this book. And that is by far, I have to say, that is one of my favorite parts of the book. I know there's many more things that happen, but if there was there's so many parts that endeared me to both Zoe and Jamie, who are the main characters. But that scene was so, between the two of them, just to kind of let the listeners know. So Jamie is a gentleman with no memory of his past, and he's able to, his ability is to...
You want me to fill in?
Yeah, describe it. Yeah,
I should talk about my book.
I can describe it, but yeah, tell me. Yeah,
okay, so Jamie is a supervillain known as the Mind Robber because he can stun you into a stupor and then look into your memories and then selectively remove them, so robbing your mind. And he is really a very thoughtful, very nice guy who is a extremely good cat owner. He is so good to his cat Normal, but he puts on this persona of like a wild cackling villain because he figures the more he acts like that, on stage, basically, the more people will be afraid of him and the less that people will get hurt during this. So he can just go in, do his job, basically get his rent money, and then go. And then on the other side, you have Zoe, who is a superhero known as the Throwing Star. And she's your prototypical superhero. She's fast, she's strong, she can kind of fly, like she kind of hovers. And she's reckless personally and professionally. She pays the bills by using her super speed to deliver fast food. And she claims that she is faster than any car out there, which is probably true in a big city. San Delgado was modeled after San Francisco, and you can't drive anywhere in San Francisco. So someone running across the rooftops with a heated backpack to keep your food hot is probably much faster. So that is the two protagonists, and it's an alternating view pretty much every other chapter.
Yeah, so first of all, the cat ownership aspects to Jamie as a cat owner myself was so sweet. So sweet. Cats are cats, and they are not always, they're not eager all the time. There are cats that are eager for love, but you have to gain their trust. And I kind of liked the idea of the supervillain who just loved his cat so much. And it really was like a stage persona, the Mind Robber. And I love that his cat's name was Normal.
So Normal is based physically and the way that she acts on my cat Normal. I just
nice.
I'm early drafting. I did call her Normal just to put her in the book, and like she's very awkward but very loving. So exactly the same as the book's cat. But then I thought, like, well, the Garfield people might sue me if I call him Normal. So I changed it to Normal and then kind of adapted the story to that. But so yeah, Normal, like I post pictures on social media of Normal and say that she is starring as Normal in this book.
Yeah, so he meets Zoe at like an AA meeting for people who have lost their memory. Because they both have these abilities, but neither of them can really remember who they were prior to the having their powers. Zoe knows her name because she found a name tag.
Right. And then Jamie
Yeah.
Jamie assumes an identity And one of the big themes of this book, it's something that I'm really interested in, the whole idea of like nature versus nurture, and the idea that, you know, if each of us was given like a complete blank slate with our memories, how much of us would still be the same? And like there's clearly, you know, there's a core personality that would still be there. Like, you know, your tastes might change based on what you're influenced by, but like I think like I would still be, you know, a very lawful good fix it type of person. I don't think that's changing. So that sort of thing, where I thought it would be interesting, because this happens on two levels with Zoe and Jamie. Like one of them is like what actually happens physically with their memory loss, but then also as they get to know each other and they strip away their assumed, what they assume of each other to be like their arch rivals, and then they can actually see like the person underneath. So you kind of get two levels of like, who are we really and what defines us, and is it, how much of it is external messaging and influence?
Yeah, I definitely got that from it, and I thought it was just beautifully done. And like I said before, I liked that, you know, I mean, like with Zoe, I think being Throwing Star, which was not a name that she actually chose herself.
Right. It's so her suit is she constructed her suit from pieces thrown out from behind a motorcycle shop, and she like roughly sewed some zippers to it, so it's like black pieces that kind of like they're like shoulder and arm, torso, and then like the legs, and so it kind of forms a star. And so when she's caught on camera, someone mentions that she looks like a throwing star, and then the media runs with it. And I got my first fan art from a woman who read the arc of the book, and
Exciting.
so I was so excited to see someone actually like drawing them like a comic book. It was really really cool.
Yeah, that is really exciting. I think like one of my favorite things about the internet, and you know, like there's so many things you could say about it, like, you know, in social media that you're just like, this. But one of my favorite things is the way that fans can instantaneously connect with an author and make this fan art and be like, this is what, look, I made this and
Yeah.
I love your work so much.
And I'm really jealous of my friends who write like deeper sci-fi and fantasy than I do. Like they get all sorts of really cool fan art, and like my books are a little bit more grounded in like, you know, reality, I guess. Like my characters are usually people in a family or whatever, and that's just not that exciting. But with Jamie and Zoe, you know, they have cool personas that like I'm hoping that I get fan art from this.
I think though, you know, there's something really good in that type of sci-fi, because I think not everybody is so willing to go to the deeper sci-fi, and I think
Hmm.
that this is a good way to bring people into sci-fi with characters that they can, you know, instantaneously relate to because they have these connections. And I really felt that way about, you know, Zoe and Jamie. First of all, having a superhero who's also an Uber Eats
Yeah.
delivery during the pandemic is perfect.
Yeah, I know. It's like I didn't really put that together until, because like most of that was already established. Like I did a final edit in, I think, March and April, like just polishing the text and like tightening a few things. But like all of that stuff was already established last year when I was drafting and talking things over with my editor. So as we, you know, during a pandemic have gotten more food deliveries, both for safety and also to support our local restaurants, it's like, Zoe would be really good in this, but she'd probably forget to wear a mask because she would kick herself for forgetting later, but she would forget, like it'd be out the door, and like maybe she'd run with like a newspaper over her face or something.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And you know, like I said, she was such a wonderful character. And I think so one of the things that happens between the two of them is they, and we keep going back to this, so they meet at this meeting and they realize who one another is. And they could fight, but they decide they're not going to.
Right, and there's
Yeah.
there's this understanding between them. Like part of it is that they're at a support group, and there's like a sanctity of anonymity there. And then there's also the fact that like an emergency breaks out and they have to decide like, are they going to try to save the people there once they realize that like they're not quite as arch rivalry as they imagine. So they decide that like it's necessary to work together in order to get out. And actually chapter 7, which is the escape, is actually available on tor.com. So for anyone who wants a little preview of how these two bumbling idiots managed to work together, it's on tor.com.
Excellent. So one thing that Jamie realizes is that his former persona might have a connection to Zoe and what happened to her. And I thought that was kind of a really interesting theme as we learned more with Jamie about what and who he was prior to becoming the mind robber. Where did that whole idea come from?
So I knew I wanted a story about friendship. I knew I wanted like the two leads to be friends, and I've read comics my whole life, and so like I know a lot of the genre tropes, and I wanted to kind of twist them a little bit, but also play with them in like lean into them, but then make them a little bit different too. So I knew there had to be a larger entity out there. So if these two are going to team up, they have to team up against something. I saw one Goodreads review. I shouldn't go to Goodreads, but I did. An early review saying that the reader almost wished that the book could just be like TV episodes of them doing like silly things together. And I get that because it's a lot of fun to just write them bantering off of each other and like, you know, what if they went to the grocery store or something like that? But
well,
I
that's
think
why fan fiction exists.
Exactly, yeah. But
yeah,
for the purposes of an actual novel, I think there has to be like a bigger narrative arc.
Yeah.
So so it was important to establish like a third entity, and I thought everything about them is like they're opposites, but they intertwine. And so that's how I wanted to present like when you realize like where they actually came from, it is kind of opposite situations, but then they're still intertwined. And then once things start to come together, like how does their experiences together, how does that affect who they are with that knowledge? Which again goes back to that nature versus nurture thing. I really wanted it to be about people feeling like they had the freedom to make their own choices.
I liked how conscious that became to them as they learned more and more about their history and how they got these powers and who they are. You know, that they were almost given like this gift of a blank slate. And especially in Jamie's case, you know, who he chose to be from that point on was everything.
The idea too was like I really wanted to lean into, so one, the real person underneath like the super persona. We were talking about hench, you know, earlier, and I loved how Natalie gives that personalization to like the people who are just like cannon fodder for supervillains. And I think I'm kind of going the same way here, but for like the superhero and the supervillain directly, and in a much less epic way than Natalie's done.
Yeah, I think I spent about like 10 minutes that I had to cut out of that interview just laughing about the existence of Electric Eel. Because
I don't know if you've heard I'm listening to the audiobook. I'm like 80% through it right now, but the narrator does like all the villain voices, and they're like electronically distorted so that like they're true villain voices.
awesome.
It's really
That's great.
but yeah, so I wanted to lean into the theme of like, you know, the humanity underneath like the caricature, but then also the idea of just friendship and like the value of friendship and what is necessary to build up that trust. And I wanted it specifically to be like, I identified Jamie as pansexual, and I wanted it to be like a very conscious choice where like this is not going to be a romantic relationship, this is going to be friendship, which I think in many cases is often deeper.
Yeah.
and can run more important and run longer than romantic flings. And there's so much emphasis in in modern storytelling about like the beast plot is always the romance, and it's like I didn't want it to be a romance. I wanted it to be like they are building up this friendship to find a way to work together, even though they should not be friends.
Yeah, and it worked perfectly. And I think we need more books about friends, because and I have nothing against romance at all, but I think that it is really important to portray books that are just about friends, because they shouldn't be, your friendships themselves shouldn't necessarily even be defined by the romances in your life. They should be just the important building blocks of being human and having relationships.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it just feels like there's not a lot of emphasis on that in movies, in TV. Like there's not a lot of value placed on friendships. It's like, does she get the guy? Does he get the girl? Whatever.
Yeah.
And like I just wanted to be like I wanted the question to be like, do they remain friends?
Yeah.
Like and can they trust each other?
Yeah. And it was great. And I think that's kind of a theme in superhero world in general, because you're dealing with, I mean, of course there is a lot of interpersonal relationships depending on your superheroes of choice, but there is a lot of like, can you work as a team? Can we look beyond these differences? Can you accept these things that I've done in the past? Can you accept who I was in the past? And I think that's why superhero stories are great for friendship stories.
And I think Jamie and Zoe make better friends than they do superhero partners.
Yeah, for sure.
I had this joking thread with Fonda Lee, who wrote the Jade War and Jade City and the upcoming Jade Legacy, and her books have powered people in it too. So there's a little Easter egg in my book for Fonda's books. But we were joking on Twitter about a crossover, and then she said something like, Jamie and Zoe would not survive in my world. They'd be bickering, and then like her character would just walk up and punch them for being dumb. And I'm like, that's true. They would not accomplish anything.
So do you have a favorite superhero canon? What's your favorite type? Like, are you, I mean, I know DC versus Marvel is like the classic, but there's so many more directions things go in. So yeah, what did you consume when you were a child, and what do you like now?
When I was a kid, my favorites were the Punisher, who is not really super powered, just really angry and
super angry. Anger is he's always like he's always angry before Mark Ruffalo said it. Like the Punisher really was always angry.
But I loved the John Bernthal version that was on Netflix was amazing, and like
my God, so good.
I was so dedicated when I was a kid and a teen that like I hunted down video stores to find the Dolph Lundgren made for video movie of the Punisher in like '94 or whatever, and it was terrible. So it's like having seen every iteration of the Punisher, and like the John Bernthal one's amazing. But I loved X-Men. And like I know the X-Men have like just spiraled in so many different directions, and I am so partial to that classic X-Men team, and I always feel like no one has done Gambit right except for the cartoon and the comic, and I wish someone took that property and did right by him. And then Batman, like the post 80s like gritty Batman before it got too gritty.
Yeah.
But like especially the animated series, which is just in my opinion, is like peak Batman storytelling. It's just like it is flawless. Like the original animated series is just so good, and I can rewatch it now, and like the writing is just brilliant on it.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
It's before like the dark Bruce Wayne, noir Batman like really got overdone. Like I think in the last decade, like we've kind of gone overboard with gritty Batman.
Yeah.
And I love how the Lego Batman kind of makes fun of that. But yeah, those are the main things that I read in like the 80s and the 90s. And then after college, like I kind of moved away from comic books, and it wasn't intentional. I just found like I didn't have the time to constantly go and pick up stuff. I did just get a Marvel Unlimited subscription about a month ago, and I'm really enjoying just like, as a parent, it's really hard to find hours in the day to read. So I'm able to catch up on comics now. I'm like, I just have 15 minutes. I'm going to read a comic on Marvel Unlimited. So I am catching up right now.
Yeah, I have to say that Batman animated series was so instrumental in my own childhood. And it's very interesting to me because that's kind of where I learned more about the Rogues Gallery, like the fact that Scarecrow existed and the fact that the Mad Hatter existed. I didn't like actually know that they didn't just create him for that series. And then in the I think he shows up in like classic Batman and also in the comics as well. And I was like, wait, what? He's like a creepy B-list.
I don't know if you've seen the Harley Quinn animated series on
Not
HBO
yet.
Max.
I'm dying to.
It is so good because it's like it's that same animation style. And I'd say like it's the same like complete rogues gallery of villains, and also like the Justice League is there, but it's like The Office except they swear a lot. And it's just, I did not know that like you could ever write Killer Croc and Clayface in a way that like makes them my favorite characters, but they're given these character quirks where they're so endearing. So if I could write like a spin-off property for the Harley Quinn, specifically the Harley Quinn TV show, I would love to do that because it's so driven by character and it's so quirky and so funny. So highly, highly recommend it.
I actually will be checking that out very shortly. I was going to mention Harley Quinn herself was an original from the Batman animated series, and I'm grateful because that character's been kind of done in many different ways, but just her rise was very interesting. I always find it disturbing when people consider her and the Joker relationship goals. I thought they were a really good intro to why relationships can be toxic. And a little aside about me, and I'm leaving this in the interview because I don't care. I'm a dork and I've been in quarantine since March. When I found out that Mark Hamill voiced the Joker in that series, I cried. He made me so happy.
Yeah, and it's like I think I remember finding out about that, I think in the 90s, where it was just like someone mentioned it and we're like, what? Or it was like in a magazine or something, and it's like it didn't make sense. And then I watched the credits very carefully and I'm like, holy crap, it's Mark Hamill. And I think like it's interesting that further versions of the Joker, at least in the animated form, all kind of do a version of Mark Hamill's Joker. Like it's so definitive. I don't know if you played the Arkham trilogy of Batman games, Arkham, so Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, and Arkham Knight. And what I really loved about those games, it felt like it had like this art style that was very much like the Tim Burton Gothic art style. It had a grittiness from like the Christopher Nolan movies, and it had the voice cast of Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill.
Nice.
So it was like, it felt like the best of all like modern Batman adaptations put into one really fun video game. So for any Batman fans that have not played it, it's really worth your time.
So also just kind of riffing off of superheroes, there's a lot of, and I spoke about this with Natalie as well, there's a lot of like good superhero stories that also parody superhero stories. So The Tick always comes to mind.
I remember when in the 90s when my friends like showed me The Tick and like I didn't get it at first. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. And then like it took a little bit. I'm like, oh, they're making fun of it. I do love, like, my favorite show on TV right now is, I mean, it's serious, but also kind of a parody in that like, it's very self-aware of itself, is Legends of Tomorrow. Which
I've heard good things about that one.
So the first season is very serious and it's terrible, and they even make fun of it on the show. But like if you skip the first season, after that it gradually becomes like it's like the most the chemistry between the characters is so great, and they just lean into like the absolute ridiculousness of like of the superhero genre, and they're also doing time travel, and so it's like unlike Doctor Who, where there's like always kind of like fixing things, the legends are more like intentionally breaking things, and a lot of that spirit influence writing We Could Be Heroes. Like that's sort of like
I could see that. Yeah.
Energy. Yeah. But that's my favorite show on TV right now. I love that cast so much. And I if anyone is trying to pick it up, but like, you know, maybe if they watch The Flash or, you know, other DC shows and they've heard of it, please skip the first season because it will turn you off. It's really, really bad. You can jump into season 2 right away.
So is We Can Be Heroes. So we could be heroes. I keep saying we can. We could be heroes. It's out and it's on sale and will be also available at libraries January 26th.
Mm-hmm.
Is it meant to be a standalone, or do you see more adventures in that world?
So everything I've written has intentionally been standalone. During the last pass of this, like we wrote an ending that was a little bit more open-ended. My editor asked me to change it, and then she also asked me to like expand the world. And it wasn't necessarily for the intention of a sequel. She just said like it just feels like there's a bigger world out there, and so you'll see references to rumored superhero incidents in other places. And so I don't know if we will ever try to sell a sequel to it, but I have ideas, and I think the world is big enough to sustain it. So I would love to, because writing these two is a lot of fun. Contractually, like I just turned in my 4th book, and it has nothing to do with superheroes.
So yeah, that was actually my next question. What are you working on now?
So this one comes out January 26th, and then about a year later, sometime in January, February, the year after that, I have a book that is tentatively titled Second Contact, and it's about a family that 15 years ago, there's 3 siblings, and one of the siblings is abducted by aliens, and then 15 years later, that sibling reappears. And he claims to have been fighting an intergalactic space war the whole time. And it's really an examination of how a traumatic event can fracture a family and like cause people to go in different directions. And then what happens when that fracture is not necessarily healed, but like brought back together. And how do these people deal with that? Like not knowing if this person is telling the truth or not.
Well,
so it's
yeah.
I've been telling people it's kind of like an X-Files episode if the entire episode focused on like the family that Mulder and Scully are investigating.
I am definitely going to read that one, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us about it.
Oh yeah, I will make all sorts of X-Files references.
Nice. Good stuff. All right. It was my absolute pleasure talking to you. Once you're invited back at any time to talk books, superheroes, anything you want.
I would be happy to do that. I could go on forever.
Oh, it's always very difficult for me when I have an interviewee who's like interested in that stuff, not to kind of veer off into, so what else do you like?
Yeah.
Is it the same stuff as me?
I've been doing media for the Star Wars anthology that came out that I'm in, and so it's really hard not to just get into like an hour of random Star Wars talk before that.
Is that one? Is that the From a Different Point of View?
Yes, yeah, I have a story in that. Asked.
And I love that the title of that book is also fabulous as well.
So the way that book works, there was an original one that came out 3 years ago, and that was from retelling. The original one was retelling A New Hope from different points of view, so like all the side characters. And then this one is retelling Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, excellent. Very cool. So Mike Chen, I want to thank you so much for being here. This was Jessica, and we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.